My name is Ryan, 34M, and up until last month, I thought I had a pretty good life. You know the drill: wife, house, decent job, the works. My wife, Emily, 32F, and I have been married for 10 years, together for 12. We met back in college. She was that girl, the one who lit up the room without even trying. I was lucky to have her, and I knew it. We built our lives together from the ground up: careers, a nice home in the suburbs, even talks about starting a family. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is, right? It started off as just another Saturday, a day that was supposed to be one of those perfect days. Every year, our town hosts a balloon festival. Hot air balloons, food trucks, live music, the whole works. It's become a tradition for us. We've gone every year for the past 5 years, and we always made a whole day of it. I was excited, thinking that this would be a chance for us to reconnect. Things had been a little off between us lately. Emily had been distant, more distracted than usual. I figured it was just the stress of her job. She works as a marketing director for a large firm, and they've been working her hard. But she seemed excited for the festival, and I thought maybe things would get back to normal. That morning, I woke up early, packed a picnic blanket, and got our favorite iced coffees from the cafe around the corner. Emily looked beautiful, like she always did, wearing this sundress that I loved. Her long brown hair was loose, and for a brief moment, I felt like maybe today would be a good day. A day where we could just enjoy each other's company without the tension that had been hanging between us for the past few months. We drove to the festival, the conversation light and easy. Nothing heavy, just small talk about work, our plans for the week. The balloon festival is held in this big, open field, and it was packed with families, couples, and groups of friends. We found a good spot on the hill, spread out the blanket, and settled in to watch the balloons being inflated. For the first couple of hours, everything was fine. We wandered through the vendor stalls, grabbed some food from a truck, and played a few carnival games. I even won Emily a stuffed bear, something I hadn't managed to do in years. She laughed, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and for a moment, it felt like maybe things were getting back to normal. But as the afternoon wore on, I noticed she was checking her phone a lot, more than usual. Every few minutes, she'd glance down at it, type something quickly, and then put it away. I asked her if everything was okay, and she just smiled and said, "Yeah, work stuff. Nothing to worry about." But the knot in my stomach was telling me something else. I brushed it off, not wanting to start an argument. The balloon launch was the big event of the day. As the sun started to set, the field was bathed in this soft, golden light, and the hot air balloons began to inflate, their vibrant colors filling the sky. It was beautiful, one of those moments that makes you feel small in the best way possible. We were sitting on the blanket, watching the balloons rise when Emily suddenly stood up. "I'm going to grab us some lemonade," she said, barely looking at me.
Now?
I asked, surprised. "The balloons are about to take off." "I'll be quick," she said, already walking away before I could protest. I watched her disappear into the crowd, the knot in my stomach tightening. Something wasn't right. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I texted her, asking if everything was okay, but she didn't respond. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when the sinking feeling in my chest started. I stood up, scanning the crowd, trying to spot her, but with so many people around, it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And then I saw her. She was standing near one of the vendor tents, but she wasn't alone. There was a guy with her. Tall, dark hair, dressed in business casual clothes, totally out of place for a festival like this. He had his hand on her back, and she was leaning in close to him. My heart started pounding in my chest, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then she kissed him. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It wasn't an innocent hello kiss. It was the kind of kiss that left no room for interpretation. A kiss that said, "I'm with you." My world collapsed in that moment. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was rooted to the spot, my mind spinning, trying to catch up with what I had just seen. Emily, my wife of 10 years, was standing in the middle of a crowded festival, kissing another man. The noise of the crowd faded into the background, and all I could hear was the deafening sound of my heart pounding in my ears. For a split second, I thought maybe I had seen it wrong. Maybe it was a trick of the light or just my mind playing tricks on me. But no, I had seen it. I had seen the way she leaned into him, the way he held her, the way she kissed him like it was the most natural thing in the world. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, knocking the wind out of me. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? To us? I wanted to storm over there, to grab her, to confront them both in front of everyone. But I couldn't. My feet felt like they were made of lead, and my body refused to move. I was paralyzed, watching my marriage unravel in front of me. They didn't even notice me. Emily was too wrapped up in him, laughing at something he said, her hand resting on his arm like they were a couple, like she hadn't just walked away from me 20 minutes ago, pretending everything was fine. I finally managed to move, turning away before I completely lost it. My vision blurred with a mixture of rage and sadness as I stumbled away from the hill, away from the balloons, away from the life I thought I knew. I don't remember how I got back to the car. My legs carried me on autopilot, my mind still reeling from what I had just seen. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. What now? What the hell do I do now? I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the dashboard, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. Emily, the woman I had built my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, had been sneaking around behind my back, and I hadn't even seen it coming. I thought back over the past few months, the late nights at work, the increased phone use, the way she'd been so distant. I had chalked it all up to stress, to the pressures of her job. But now I knew better. She had been lying to me. She had been seeing someone else, and I had been too blind to see it. I felt sick. My stomach churned, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. How could she do this to me? After everything we had been through, after all the promises we had made to each other, how could she throw it all away for him? I couldn't stay in the car forever. Eventually, I had to go home. I had to face her. But the thought of walking into the house, of seeing her, of having to confront her about what I had just witnessed, it felt like too much. I wasn't ready. I started the car and drove home in silence, my mind still spinning. The drive felt like it took forever, even though our house was only 15 minutes from the festival. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had set, and the house was dark. Emily's car wasn't there. She still hadn't come home. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the front door, trying to summon the strength to go inside. The house we had built together suddenly felt like a stranger's house, a place that held memories I wasn't sure I could bear to face anymore. Eventually, I got out of the car and walked inside. The silence was deafening. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. I felt numb, completely and utterly numb. It was past midnight when Emily finally came home. I had been sitting on the couch for hours, staring at the front door, waiting for the moment I knew would change everything. When I heard the soft click of the door opening, my heart rate spiked, and I felt a rush of adrenaline shoot through me. I heard her keys drop onto the table by the door, the familiar sound that usually signaled the end of her long workday. But this time, it felt different, final, almost. The weight of the silence between us was suffocating. I stayed seated on the couch, my back to her, my mind reeling as I tried to prepare myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. "Ryan?" Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she was testing the waters, unsure of how much I knew. I didn't respond at first. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the burden of what I had witnessed earlier. I didn't trust myself to speak, not yet. I wasn't sure if I would explode in anger or completely fall apart. "Ryan, are you awake?" she asked again, stepping into the living room. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the tension she was feeling. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. "I saw you, Emily," I said, my voice low and cold, the weight of those words hanging in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. She froze, her breath hitching in her throat. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. What do you mean?" she stammered, though she knew exactly what I meant. "I saw you at the festival," I said, turning to face her. "With him." her face drained of color, and her eyes filled with tears. She looked down at the floor, as if she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. Ryan, Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't lie to me. Don't try to explain it away. I saw you, Emily. I saw you kiss him. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. The guilt and shame were written all over her face, but it did nothing to ease the pain that was clawing at my chest. How long? I asked, my voice hoarse. How long have you been seeing him? Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, her shoulders trembling. I'm so sorry, Ryan, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't. How long? I demanded, my voice rising with anger. I was shaking now, my emotions barely contained. A few months, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. It's been a few months. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. A few months. She had been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back for months, and I hadn't even seen it coming. My legs gave out, and I sank back down onto the couch, my head in my hands. I felt sick, like the walls were closing in on me. How had I been so blind? How had I missed the signs? I never wanted to hurt you, Emily sobbed, taking a step toward me. I love you, Ryan. I don't know what I was thinking. Love me? I cut her off, lifting my head to look at her. You love me? You've been seeing someone else for months, Emily. You've been lying to my face. Don't stand there and tell me you love me. I do, she cried, her voice desperate. I was confused, Ryan. I've been so lost lately, and I didn't know how to tell you. I never meant for it to go this far. Her words felt hollow. Everything about her felt hollow now. How long have you been unhappy? I asked, my voice breaking. How long have you been pretending that everything was okay? She wiped her tears, struggling to speak. I don't know. I've been feeling disconnected from you. Like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Disconnected? Drifting apart? I had no idea she had felt this way. Yes, things had been a little off between us, but I had chalked it up to stress, to the normal ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But to hear her say that she had been so unhappy, so lost, that she turned to someone else, it broke me. You should have talked to me, I said quietly, my voice raw with emotion. You should have told me how you were feeling instead of going behind my back. We could have worked through it. We could have tried to fix it. I know, she sobbed, her whole body trembling. I know I should have. I made a mistake, Ryan. A terrible mistake. But I love you, and I want to fix this. I want to make things right. I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that our marriage wasn't completely destroyed. But the image of her with him was burned into my mind, and I didn't know how to erase it. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She collapsed onto the couch beside me, her tears falling fast and hard. Please, Ryan, don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll quit my job. I'll go to therapy. Anything. Just don't give up on me. Her words hung in the air, but I didn't know how to respond. The trust between us had been shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, until I couldn't take it anymore. I need some time, I finally said, standing up. I need to think. The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and heartbreak. Emily moved into the guest room, and we barely spoke. Every time I saw her, I felt a fresh wave of pain crash over me. How had we ended up here? How had my marriage fallen apart so completely, so quickly? Emily apologized constantly, but her words felt empty. Every time she tried to talk to me, to explain herself, I shut her down. I wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't ready to confront the depth of the betrayal. The house felt like a tomb. Every room was filled with memories of the life we had built together, a life that now felt like a lie. I couldn't escape it. The walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with reminders of what I had lost. Even the smell of her perfume lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of what used to be. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself, but it was no use. My mind was always racing, replaying everything that had happened, torturing myself with questions that had no answers. How long had she been lying to me? How often had they met? Did she think about him when she was with me? The worst part was the uncertainty. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to fight for my marriage, to try to fix things, but another part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. The pain was too much, and I didn't know if I had it in me to rebuild something that had been so thoroughly broken. I texted Josh, my best friend, and told him everything. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me make sense of it all. Josh had been my rock since college, and I knew he'd be there for me now. He listened patiently as I vented, his expression growing darker with every word. "Emily," he said, shocked. "Man, I don't even know what to say. I never thought she'd do something like this." "Neither did I said, my voice hollow. "But here we are." Josh was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know." "You don't have to decide right now," he said, offering me a sympathetic look. "Take some time. Figure out what you want." That was the problem. I didn't know what I wanted. How do you make a decision like that? How do you decide whether to fight for your marriage or let it go? I had loved Emily for so long, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. But the thought of staying with her, knowing what she had done, knowing that she had betrayed me so completely, that was unbearable too. "I'm just so angry," I said, my hands clenching into fists. "I don't even know who I'm more angry with, her or myself. How did I not see this coming?" Josh shook his head. "You can't blame yourself, man. This is on her. She made the choice to cheat, not you." "I know," I muttered, though it didn't feel that simple. Josh was right, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I was stuck, trapped in a web of conflicting emotions, and I didn't know how to untangle myself. A few days later, Emily knocked on the door of the guest room, where I had been sleeping since our fight. She had been trying to give me space, but I could tell she was growing desperate. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice tentative, "can we talk?" I sat up in bed, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I didn't know if I was ready to have this conversation, but I couldn't avoid it forever. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "Come in." She stepped into the room, her eyes red from crying, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a shadow of the woman I had known, the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it was quickly drowned out by the anger and hurt that had been festering inside me. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "About everything. About what I did. And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to make up for. But I want to try. I want to fix this, Ryan. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I stared at her, my heart aching. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that our marriage wasn't completely destroyed. But the pain was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. "I don't know if that's possible," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand, her touch hesitant. "Please, Ryan, don't give up on us. I'm begging you. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust. Just give me a chance." I pulled my hand away, the weight of her words crushing me. "I need time," I said, standing up. "I need time to figure out what I want." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, alone with her guilt. I tried to avoid thinking about Emily's words in the days that followed, but it was impossible. Her pleas, her tears, they echoed in my mind, and no matter how hard I tried to push them away, they wouldn't leave me alone. I wasn't ready to make a decision. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but at the same time, I wasn't ready to give up on our marriage either. I felt stuck, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether to jump or walk away. One afternoon, as I sat in the kitchen, sipping on a lukewarm cup of coffee, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from an unknown number. Unknown, "Hey Ryan, it's Chris. Can we talk?" Chris, the man Emily had been cheating on me with. Just seeing his name made my blood boil, and I almost threw my phone across the room. How dare he text me? What could he possibly have to say to me? What did he think I wanted to hear from him? My fingers hovered over the phone screen, and for a moment, I considered not replying. But curiosity got the better of me. I needed answers. I needed to know more than just what Emily had told me. Me, what do you want? His response came quickly. Chris, I know this is awkward, but I think you deserve to know the whole truth. Can we meet? The whole truth. What more could there be? I already knew about the affair. But something in his message felt urgent, like there was something I was missing. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. I wanted to look him in the eye, to confront him, to hear what he had to say for himself. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, one of those places that's always crowded with people during the lunch rush. As I drove there, my hands tightened around the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. What was I going to say to him? What could he possibly say to me that would make any of this make sense? When I arrived, Chris was already there, sitting at a table in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I walked in, his expression tense and awkward. He stood up when I approached the table, like he wasn't sure if he should offer a handshake or keep his distance. I wasn't interested in any pleasantries, so I sat down without a word, my eyes locked on him. Thanks for meeting me, he said, his voice quieter than I expected. I know this is awkward, to say the least. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it, I said coldly, my jaw clenched. Why are you here? What do you want? He sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not here to make excuses. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm not trying to justify it. But I thought you deserved to know the truth. The truth? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. I already know the truth. I saw you with her. What more is there to know? He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the table as he fidgeted with his coffee cup. She didn't tell me she was married when we first started talking, he said quietly. I didn't know about you at first. I narrowed my eyes at him. But you found out eventually, and you still kept seeing her. He nodded, guilt written all over his face. Yeah, I did. And I'm sorry for that. I should have ended it the moment I found out she was married. But I didn't. I got caught up in it. My fists clenched under the table. His apology felt hollow, like it was more for his own conscience than for me. I didn't care that he was sorry. Sorry didn't change what had happened. There's more, I said, leaning forward. What else do you have to say? Chris swallowed hard, glancing around the cafe as if he was afraid someone might overhear us. She told me she was going to leave you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She said she was in love with me and that she was planning on filing for divorce. My stomach dropped. What? She said she didn't want to be with you anymore, Chris continued, his eyes darting back to mine. That she was just waiting for the right time to tell you. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Emily had been planning to leave me? She had told Chris she was in love with him? It was one thing to know about the affair, but this was a whole new level of betrayal. My mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. Did she mean it? I asked, my voice hollow. Did she actually mean it? Chris shrugged, looking miserable. I don't know. Sometimes she seemed sure, but other times, she'd backtrack. I could never get a straight answer from her. The anger inside me boiled over. I stood up, pushing my chair back so hard that it scraped against the floor. So what? I snapped. You thought telling me this would somehow make you the good guy? You thought this would make me feel better? He flinched at the harshness of my tone. I'm not trying to be the good guy, Ryan. I just thought you deserved to know. Deserve to know? I spat, my voice rising. The only thing I deserve is for you to stay the hell out of my life. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked out of the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to hear anything else he had to say. I didn't want to hear about how confused Emily had been or how complicated things were. I didn't care. All I knew was that the woman I had loved for 10 years had been planning to leave me for someone else, and I had been too blind to see it. When I got home, my head was still spinning from what Chris had told me. I paced around the living room, my mind racing, my hands shaking. I needed to talk to Emily. I needed answers. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, sitting at the table with her laptop open, probably working or pretending to work. The moment she saw me, she knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "I talked to Chris," I said bluntly, watching her reaction. Her face went pale, and she set her laptop aside, standing up slowly. "What?" "He told me everything," I said, my voice cold. "That you were going to leave me. That you told him you were in love with him." Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head, her voice trembling. "Ryan, Don't lie to me," I snapped, stepping closer to her. "I want the truth. Did you tell him you were going to leave me? Did you tell him you were in love with him?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. "I can't believe you," I said, my voice rising. "I can't believe you would lie to me for months, tell him you were going to leave me, and then act like we could just fix this. What the hell were you thinking, Emily?" "I wasn't thinking," she sobbed, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears. "I was confused, Ryan. I didn't mean it. I wasn't going to leave you. I don't know what I was doing." "You don't know what you were doing?" I repeated, my voice full of disbelief. "You told him you were in love with him, Emily. That's not something you just say. Did you mean it? Did you love him?" "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "I thought I did, but I didn't. I was lost. I felt disconnected from you, and I was looking for something, anything, that made me feel alive again. But it wasn't real, Ryan. It wasn't." I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. "You should have come to me. You should have talked to me. We could have worked through it together. But instead, you turned to him." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, Ryan. The biggest mistake of my life." For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the weight of everything hanging between us like a suffocating cloud. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if there was anything left to say. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. She broke down, collapsing onto the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Ryan," she choked out. "Please don't give up on us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was too overwhelmed, too broken, too lost to even think about what forgiveness would look like. The days that followed were agonizing. I went back and forth, torn between wanting to fight for my marriage and wanting to walk away. Emily tried to talk to me every day, but I kept my distance. I couldn't handle the pain of seeing her, of hearing her apologies, of thinking about what she had done. I started seeing a therapist, hoping that talking to someone would help me make sense of my emotions. It wasn't easy. The therapist asked me to confront my feelings of anger, betrayal, and guilt head-on. And there were days when I left the sessions feeling more confused than when I had walked in. But slowly, I began to understand something. I wasn't just angry with Emily. I was angry with myself, too. I had missed the signs. I had allowed our marriage to drift, thinking that everything would work itself out. I hadn't fought for us when I should have. But now, I had to decide. Did I want to fight for her? Could I even if I wanted to? After weeks of therapy and countless sleepless nights, I finally came to a decision. I sat Emily down one evening after work, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. She knew something was coming. She could see it in my face. "I've made a decision," I said quietly, my voice steady. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" "I want a divorce." The words felt heavy as they left my mouth, but I knew they were the right ones. I couldn't stay in a marriage where the trust had been so thoroughly broken. I couldn't move past what she had done, no matter how much she apologized or how much she said she loved me. Emily burst into tears, shaking her head, pleading with me not to go through with it. But I had already made up my mind. The damage was done, and I couldn't undo it. The days that followed my decision were some of the hardest I'd ever lived through. Once I told Emily I wanted a divorce, something changed between us. The endless begging and apologies stopped. She seemed to accept that the marriage was over, though the sadness in her eyes never left. But it wasn't just sadness. There was a deep sense of loss, a realization that we had reached the point of no return. The legal process of divorce is soul-crushing, no matter how civil you try to make it. Emily and I sat down with our lawyers to discuss dividing our assets, our house, our savings, everything we had built together over the past decade. Each meeting felt like a slow dissection of our life together, cutting apart the things we once shared. Selling the house was the hardest part. It was more than just a place to live. It was where we had dreamed of starting a family, where we'd hosted countless dinners with friends, where we had grown together as a couple. I remember walking through each room one last time before the sale went through, each step echoing in the empty space that had once been filled with laughter, conversations, and quiet moments between us. I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the spot where we used to sit and watch movies together. I had a flash of all the moments that had passed in this room. Her laughter, the way she'd curl up next to me with her head on my shoulder. Now, it all felt like another life. A life that no longer existed. When the house finally sold, it felt like the last thread connecting us had been cut. Emily moved in with her sister for the time being, and I found a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with barely enough space for my things, but it felt like the fresh start I needed, a place to rebuild. Despite everything, Emily and I tried to keep things civil. The divorce was painful, but we didn't want to tear each other apart in the process. There were moments of tension, of course, moments when one of us would get frustrated or overwhelmed and the emotions would boil over. But in the end, we managed to keep things amicable, if only because we both knew that fighting would just make the pain worse. We finalized the divorce in court on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was almost empty, and the judge barely looked up as he stamped the paperwork that made it official. Just like that, a decade of marriage was reduced to a few signatures on a piece of paper. Emily and I exchanged awkward goodbyes outside the courthouse. There were no words left to say. No more apologies, no more explanations. We hugged briefly, more out of habit than anything else, and then we went our separate ways. As I watched her walk away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that the process was finally over, but grief for what we had lost. In the weeks following the divorce, I felt like I was living in a void. The silence of my new apartment was suffocating, the kind of quiet that makes you realize just how much space a person can take up in your life. Even when Emily and I weren't speaking much during those last few months, her presence in the house had still been a part of my life. Now, I was truly alone. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects just to keep my mind occupied. It helped, but only temporarily. Every time I left the office, I was reminded that I didn't have anyone to come home to. The bed felt too big for one person, and the nights dragged on endlessly. I tried distracting myself by going out with friends. Josh was a constant presence in my life during this time, always checking in to make sure I wasn't drowning in my own thoughts. He dragged me out to bars, to concerts, to anything that would get me out of my apartment for a few hours. It helped, in a way. But there was only so much that alcohol and loud music could do to drown out the pain. The hardest part was the quiet moments. The mornings when I'd wake up and reach for my phone, half expecting to see a message from Emily, or the evenings when I'd cook dinner for one and realize just how empty the apartment felt without someone to share it with. I started therapy again, hoping it would help me process everything. The sessions were tough. My therapist asked me questions I didn't want to answer, forced me to confront emotions I had been trying to bury. But slowly, over time, I began to understand the depth of the pain I was feeling. It wasn't just about losing Emily. It was about losing the life I thought we were going to have together. The plans we had made, the future I had envisioned. It was all gone, and I had to learn how to rebuild from the ground up. One day, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I woke up and realized that the ache in my chest wasn't as sharp as it used to be. It was still there, of course. Grief doesn't just disappear overnight, but it had softened. I wasn't thinking about Emily every moment of every day anymore. The constant loop of betrayal, anger, and sadness that had been playing in my mind for months had started to quiet. I began to find joy in small things again. I started going for morning runs, something I hadn't done in years. The fresh air and the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement helped clear my mind, gave me a sense of control that I had been missing. I also picked up an old hobby, painting. I wasn't particularly good at it, but there was something therapeutic about the act of creating something new, even if it was just a mess of colors on a canvas. Josh noticed the change in me, too. He told me one night over beers that I seemed lighter, like the weight I'd been carrying was finally lifting. He was right. I wasn't fully healed, but I was starting to heal, and that was enough for now. I stayed in therapy, working through the complicated mix of emotions that had built up over the past year. There were days when I still felt angry at Emily, angry at Chris, angry at myself for not seeing the signs earlier. But there were also days when I felt hopeful, like I could finally see a future beyond the pain. A future where I could be happy again, even if it wasn't the future I had once imagined. It's strange how life moves on, even when you feel like your world has ended. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into work, not just as a distraction, but because I realized that I wanted to excel. I found fulfillment in my career, something that had been on autopilot for a long time while I was lost in the fog of my marriage. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. Some of them had drifted away over time, and some had been pushed to the side as Emily and I built our lives together. But now, I found comfort in rekindling those friendships, in rediscovering the parts of myself that had been dormant for so long. Dating, though, was a different story. Josh kept telling me to get back out there, to move on, and start meeting new people. But the truth was, I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if I would ever be ready. The idea of trusting someone again, of opening myself up to the possibility of another heartbreak, was terrifying. The scars from what had happened with Emily were still too fresh, too deep. Still, I didn't want to stay stuck in the past forever. I knew that moving on didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant accepting it, learning from it, and finding a way to live with the pain. I wanted to believe that I could find love again, even if it took time. One day, I decided to dip my toes into the dating world again. It was awkward and uncomfortable at first. I wasn't sure how to navigate the apps or how to have a normal conversation without feeling like I was betraying the life I had once had with Emily. But I went on a few dates, kept things casual, and slowly started to get more comfortable with the idea of opening myself up again. It's been over a year since the divorce, and I've come a long way. Looking back, I realized just how much I've grown. The pain of the betrayal, the anger, the grief, it's all still there, but it's no longer the driving force in my life. I've learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live with the scars. I've also learned that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But it's possible, not just with others, but with yourself. I've started to trust myself again, to trust my instincts, my decisions, and my ability to move forward, no matter how difficult it may be. Emily and I haven't spoken in months. We went our separate ways after the divorce, and I think that was for the best. I don't know if she's still with Chris, or if she's moved on to someone else. I try not to think about it. That part of my life is over, and dwelling on it won't help me heal. As for me, I'm still taking things one day at a time. I'm dating again, but I'm not rushing into anything. I'm focusing on building a life that makes me happy, that fulfills me, whether or not I have someone by my side. I've realized that I don't need a relationship to define my worth or my happiness. I'm enough on my own. There are still days when I think about what could have been, about the life Emily and I had planned together. But those thoughts don't haunt me the way they used to. They're just memories now, part of the past. And as I stand here, looking toward the future, I feel hopeful. Life goes on, and I'm ready for whatever comes next.